Hi, everyone. So thrilled to be here, especially with this incredible group of panelists. I am so honored. And today, the important topic, today, yesterday, tomorrow, it's always been important, but now it's time to stop admiring the problems, activating solutions for change, creating measurement for accountability, and doing something, moving forward all around the inclusive workforce. We are going through an inclusivity revolution. We need to close the gaps, the parity gaps, the wage gap, the pipeline gaps, the talent gaps, the people gaps, the knowledge, the learning, the leadership skills that we have, and also the policy gaps. How do we ensure that we are attracting and retaining our best talent? But we also need to create that culture of safety, that culture of security, that culture of belonging. And that all requires not just filling the pipeline with diversity, but ensuring that we're creating the environments that everyone can bring their best selves, their whole selves, their true selves, their authentic selves to work every single day and thrive in the workplace. So thrilled to have you all with us today. So I would love if you could each tell me who you are, what you do, and let's start with, what do you think the greatest challenge today for creating an inclusive workforce is? And I am going to start with Haifa. Hi, Haifa.
Hi, Shelley. My name is Haifa Jamal Al-Lail. I am a president of Haifa University, but I work now, as you know, Saudi Arabia now has the presidency of the G20 for this year, and I work as the deputy chair for the future of work and education. This is one of my really the time that I devoted for education and workforce. It's almost all my life. Since I really graduated from my PhD program till now, I work in education sector. I start with the challenges that really that the world is facing now. Labor market and education and training system and unprepared for the transformation ahead. So there are persistent challenges across G20 nation and globally, such as unemployment and poverty, as well as inequalities and inefficiencies in education, training, and I think job opportunities. The current skills gap, I can really put some maybe numbers if you allow me, Shelley. 6 out of 10 adults don't have computer skills, while the need of high-skilled jobs has increased by 25% in the last 2 decades. The other challenges is the footprint of informal labor market. You know that a lot of people everywhere around the world really having this kind of informal labor market, which represent almost 60% of the world employed population. And the last but not least, I think, which from my perspective and the perspective of the workforce that we're working now as a task force, is the youth unemployment, which before the pandemics was in severe kind of situation, and now is more, it's doubled with the pandemic level. So the youth employment, it's really to see the full impact now with the COVID-19. I think it's increasing in the rate and the capacity. I think in the face of this global challenges and that the whole world is facing for the first time in the living memory, I think the G20 must address, or governments in these days really should address and build confidence, dynamism, and real resilience in the future labor market, and design at least future-ready education system to build the human capital that the world needs in the future. I will stop here, and then we'll see the other perspective.
Well, first of all, Haifa, never stop. You keep going because it is amazing. And I just want to ask you one question before we go to Joseph, which is, are you seeing, as a champion of gender equality, are you seeing a disproportionate impact, especially during COVID, on women. And we talked about 6 out of 10 that are not tech qualified or even having computers. Are you seeing the greatest impact on women? And what I'm hearing, it's also women of color.
Yes, underprivileged actually, and some of the inclusivity is really something that we need really to look at. And it's not only women; it's the underrepresented people, regardless. It's really age or gender or I think the race. We need to really to revisit this and look at it carefully in order really to. Of course, the impact is worse on them than the rest. But because before it was really the case, and now it's becoming more and more. So this is how I see it, and I think we need a solution immediately.
And I think also you uncovered, and so we will unpack this as well, the whole oxymoron, the discrepancy or the contradiction of the fact that we are living in a digital world, and yet our next generation, our millennials, are being so underserved and not getting the education they need, and they are the ones that are the future of our workforce. So we're going to come back to that, and I think that I'm going to go as a result now to Angela, because the work that you are doing is going to help us close a lot of these gaps.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really important conversation today. Dr. Angela Jackson. I'm a partner at New Profit. It's a Boston-based philanthropy, and we invest in social entrepreneurs by giving them unrestricted capital and also strategic advice. And I lead a $15 million fund on the future of work. As a philanthropy, when I started this fund 2 years ago, we wanted to look at who is going to be disproportionately impacted by the future of work. And so if you look along the lines of race, Black, Latinx, and Indigenous workers and socioeconomic backgrounds, we know these people are going to be disproportionately impacted. But when I started working on the future of work, it was really an upmarket conversation, right? It was about like, how do you take middle-level executives and get them to higher wage jobs? And really what we try to do with our future of work grand challenge is centered on workers, number one, and centered on the workers who are going to be disproportionately impacted. So our challenge is putting out $6 million to innovators who can come up with accelerated learning solutions to cut the time in half for training for jobs of the future. And when we say jobs of the future, we mean those that are not going to be automated in the next 3 to 5 years, and to provide those wraparound supports. We know that with these historic, unprecedented unemployment rates, that people need an opportunity to reskill today. They can't take the time to go back for a 4-year degree. They can't wait a year because their rent is due next month, right? So we need to think about, how do we get the skills and information? How do we close that gap for people? And plus, provide the wraparound supports, because upskilling is just one piece of it. We also need to think about, how do we assess the skills that people already have? How do we actually place them in jobs and really count what matters on that front?
Angela, I want to say one thing, because I was sitting here thinking about mix and match skills, that if you really do know where people are, because we're all starting at different levels, and where they want to go, and you could pull the courses that you need based on your journey and your pathway, how interesting. And while COVID has been, it is a crisis and unprecedented in so many ways, we have had this break from linear education to rethink even, education and upskilling in a customized way, which is pretty interesting.
Absolutely. And we talk about the skills gap, but the reality is, a research report came out from Accenture, an opportunity at work. They said there's 73 million Americans who have the skills to do a higher wage job, but they don't have a bachelor's degree. So they don't have a credential. So when we're talking about the US context, we have people who can do the skills. Now we need innovators and innovations to think about, how do we assess those skills, and how is that assessment acceptable more widely by employers? So that's one of the challenges that we're looking at. How do we get away from that bachelor's degree and really acknowledge the skills that people may have had through their lived experience? And how do we create those assessments that all employers will acknowledge, like you'd acknowledge a 4-year degree?
Amen to that. Joseph, I promised I was going to come to you second, but I had to go to Angela. So back to you.
No, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Joe Kenner, President and CEO of Grayston. And I always like to ask this question: how many of you have heard of Grayston before now? Excellent. So anytime you have a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream or any of the other 4 flavors that we're in, you've had a Grayston product. So Grayston is a social enterprise in Southwest Yonkers. We're right next door to the Bronx, New York, and New York City. We have a for-profit bakery. That's the first benefit corporation in New York State. So we have a triple bottom line governance structure, but we also have a nonprofit that provides workforce development, training, and job development services to the folks here in Southwest Yonkers. And just to give you some background on Yonkers, it's a very economically challenged area. Our unemployment rate as of last month was about 15.7%, which is the highest in our region, the highest in our county.
What's the average?
In New York State, we're around 10%, 11% in New York State and our county. So we are, exceeding that. And we've always, even during the economic boom times, we were around 4.6, 5%, and that was considered high in February of this year. But we have the bakery, which provides inclusion brownies for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. We provide single-serve brownies in places like Whole Foods and other customers throughout this country. We're part of Ben & Jerry Unilever's global supply chain. So you can imagine what that did to our production once the pandemic hit and people were snacking and just raiding the food aisles and ordering food from home, which was great. But the story about Grayston is really the folks who make the brownies. So the inclusions that go into that pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, the brownies that you might see on the shelf in Whole Foods, or if you go to grayston.org and just order a box of brownies yourself. The story is really who makes them and how we hire them. And it's a very radically different, but a very simple model that we have, and it's called open hiring. And what that essentially means is if anybody wants to be a baker at our bakery, all they have to do is go to our office. There's a one-page sheet that you have to fill out with your name, your address, email, phone number. Look at a few questions, and it tells you, you're going to be lifting, 50-pound bags of sugar and flour. You're going to be standing. You're going to be working long hours. Are you able to work in the U.S.? Just give you that bit of information. You put your name down, and when the job becomes available, you automatically get it. No questions asked, no background checks. We don't do interviews. Someone from our human resources group will give you a call and let you know when you report for orientation. And that first day of orientation is your first day on the job. It's your first day getting access to benefits. It's your first day learning what to be like in this Grayston family and your future as a baker here. And it's something that's been practiced for almost 40 years now. We started in 1982, and we've been thriving ever since. And our goal, as we talk about inclusive workforce hiring, is really to teach other companies about this model and how they can implement it in their organization. Because at any given point in time, I can only hire about 70 people in our organization. But wouldn't it be great, particularly during these challenging times, if other companies were doing this, so we could have 1,000 more opportunities, 100,000 more opportunities, 1 million more opportunities? Because the people that we hire, and the people that we work with at our foundation, which provides the workforce development training, the people that we hire at the bakery, all of these folks, they're the hardest to employ. They're the folks that are returning citizens. They're the folks that are dealing with recovery. They might have little to no experience. I'd love to talk to you, Dr. Jackson, about your work, but these are the hardest to employ. And if not for Grayston, a lot of these people wouldn't be working at all. So
well, number one, now let me ask a question. Who now knows about Grayston? and who's obsessed? And so the concept of open hiring, which is genius as a model, Haifa is saying we need to, create this open hiring strategy for any workforce in the country. So thank you for sharing that, Haifa. But Joseph, I want to go back to you because what is your ratio diversity? Like what does your pipeline look like?
So it's interesting with the open hiring model, since it's non-judgment. So it's whoever's the next person on the list. But when you look at our bakers, and I'll talk to you about the folks that go through the traditional hiring practice too. When you look at our bakers, about 30% male-female ratio. 70% are Black, about a quarter are Hispanic, and the rest are other. And if you look,
as a market researcher, and we talk about representative population, if you just pull a random sample, which is what the open hiring model allows you to do, that's how you have authentic representation.
Absolutely. At PS, we don't advertise. There are no classifieds. We work with our local social services. We might work with the parole folks or the folks in correction, but it's really word of mouth. You can have at any given point in time, a parent, a child, a grandparent working here or going through one of our courses here at the nonprofit. It's all about word of mouth. And people.
Well, we talk about unconscious bias. This just eliminates the bias barriers completely from the recruiting, the hiring, and all the rest. We're going to come back to. There's so many great questions coming in. So for everyone sending in questions, I am going to ask them and get answers because this is such a live group. So I'm very excited about this. So Joseph, I'm going to come back to that because when you do have diversity, so I'm going to give you a tee up. When you have diversity in the pipeline, as you do, how do you create the inclusive culture that needs to go with that so that everyone, comes in, but also we retain that great talent as well. So I'm coming back to you. Nicole, hi, how are you? Tell everyone who you are, what you do.
Hi, Shelley, and hi, everybody. Thank you
for creating an inclusive workforce are.
We'll absolutely do that. Hi, everybody. So my name is Nicole Munson. I am Senior Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at the Estee Lauder Companies. And just to be clear about the Estee Lauder Companies, I'm sure that if you have some cosmetic or some fragrance in your bag or in your home, you probably have something from our company. We are a family-founded, values-driven company founded by a woman, for women. We are about 80% women, and so that obviously makes for a very interesting workforce. What I would say is, and let me just, before I even talk about the challenges, I'm responsible for our labor and employment group. I also am responsible for data privacy and for our ethics function. I would say the biggest challenge for us with the global workforce that we have, or one of the biggest challenges, is this sort of intersection of racial and social injustice that we've been seeing, the unrest over the last several months. I would say that, our employees and our consumers, right, because we not only have to have employees as stakeholders, we also have consumers as stakeholders. The intersection and figuring out the right way to address it for our employees and for our consumers. I think the company and we've done, certainly I think a good job over the last several months. We have some room to go for sure, as do all companies, but really doubling down and reaffirming our commitment to diversity, to inclusion, but also to belonging. I think we have moved away from this concept, or are moving away from inclusion and diversity, and really focusing on belonging. And with that comes the challenge of really creating an environment where employees feel like they can bring their whole selves to work every single day and not be expected to check, at the door, their race or their gender, which clearly, an employee can't hide. And so it's creating a culture where employees feel empowered, feel that they can speak up. And our employees certainly over the last several months have taken their seats at the table and certainly have spoken up about what's important to them and what it is that they expect from the company. And so as a part of that, the company has made certain commitments, including a $10 million commitment to donate to organizations that fight for racial and social justice over the next 3 years. NAACP, Legal and Education Defense Fund, Equal Justice, taking a look at the way we operate from a creative perspective to ensure that we have appropriate representation in front of and behind the camera. The company has made a commitment for racial parity, U.S. racial parity for our Black employees at all levels across the organization over the next 3 years. And so what I would say is, the challenge for us is bringing together the consumer speak and the employee speak, and really making sure that we are addressing both, and we can't do one without the other.
Well, I always say it's not only about outside in, which is the media, the message, engaging consumers, but it has to be inside out, that you got to walk the talk on the inside. So, thank you for sharing all that. And you did bring up belonging. And I always talk about diversity and inclusion is a strategy. Belonging is a feeling. And that is how you make people feel. So it is so important. It's not just about the representation, but representation leads to reflection. And when you see yourself in an organization, that also gives you that sense of safety and belonging. So thank you for sharing. Stephenie, hi, how are you?
Hi, very nice to be with you, and thanks to Concordia and all of you for bringing us together for this conversation. My name is Stephenie Foster. I'm a partner at a consulting firm called Smash Strategies, and we work with large companies and large institutions that want to make gender equality and women's empowerment central to their work. And by that, we don't just mean increasing the number of women in leadership, or focusing on hiring practices. We really look at this across the board, how to help companies have a strategic gender lens in terms of their procurement, in terms of their philanthropy, in terms of their business models. And so it really is an interesting time to be doing this work. There's obviously a lot going on and has been for many years, but it's a really fascinating time for this. Just also, we work globally. And I come from a diplomacy background. I was at the State Department in the Obama administration as a political appointee, and also have worked in the international arena otherwise. So we meld domestic and international for all of our clients across the board, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a large nonprofit or NGO. I think I want to take this a little bit, given everything everyone said, which is I agree with all those challenges. But I think one thing that we need to really think about is at the policy level, as at the workplace level, how do we make sure that women and other underrepresented groups are included in decision making? We have statistics from the US, for example. The COVID recovery task forces have had very few women. I will call out the UN yesterday, which had 52 male speakers, talking about how to move forward in this very challenging time through recovery, through how to create a more stable and peaceful world. And I think we need to make sure that we're very purposeful, so that as we are having conversations at the workplace, we engage people and have mechanisms to do that, bring people into the conversation, ask them what their issues are, how they'd like them addressed, but that we also take that through our policy-making process, so that we're doing that, whether it's how we think about allocating funds for recovery, how we think about looking at the policy, how policies impact men and women, so that we are actually talking to the people who are really, whose lives are at stake, whether, again, it's at the workplace or in terms of the people who are making the decisions every day about how we're going to respond, not just in the COVID era, but obviously there's so many workplace issues raised with COVID around gender and work-life balance, and people trying to do a million things at all the time. But I think my central challenge really across the people we work with and just personally is thinking about how to make sure we have more women and underrepresented groups able to weigh in on the policy from the top to where they work every day.
Well, bringing that up, and reflecting their thoughts and feelings. And we do know not only is it a disproportionate impact on women of color as well, but also that invisible work, that added assignment of homeschooling, which is still, caregiving is still predominantly a female issue. And so, all of these things are, obviously disproportionately impacting women. Archana, let's go to you.
Hey there.
Hey, Tell us who you are, what you do, and some of the greatest challenges of the inclusive workforce, and then we're going to get right to solutions and some other areas that Haifa is sending me great messaging around. So thank you, Haifa. Archana.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for having us all here. This is an incredible conversation and such powerful speakers here too. My name is Archana Subramanian. I am the Senior Vice President and COO for America's Sales at Salesforce. I grew up in India, and for about the past decade or so, I've lived in the United States. So I have maybe a little bit of an immigrant perspective here. But I grew up at Salesforce and very fortunate to have incredible sponsors and mentors. And Salesforce has taken very strong stance in as far as diversity and inclusion and equality broadly. And back to your point, Stephenie, around people, philanthropy, and purchasing, they're putting their money where their mouth is. So it's been incredible to be part of that. But I am part of the sales organization. So a lot of the things that hit everybody comes to sales a little bit slowly, where vast majority is still white and male. And so about a few years ago, when I looked around the table, and even today, 90% of the time, I'm the only female person of color in most rooms or in Zoom meetings these days. I think it was at that point where I'm like, well, I'm going to use my voice and seat at the table for something broader. So I'm part of a lot of the equality initiatives and pushing the agenda forward at Salesforce. I think the bigger challenge, and I agree with everything that's being said here, but I think it's this whole year has been, in a way, truth-telling, but it's also forcing us to prioritize and balance everything at once. A lot of companies are struggling to stay afloat, but while also making sure they're figuring out their inclusivity practices, making sure they're hiring the right people. While, of course, COVID is hitting underrepresented groups and women in general disproportionately. So how do you solve all of these things at once? I think is really what this year is boiling down to. And it comes to, making sure it's a priority even when the media attention goes away. We've kind of moved away from some of those things, and in a world where we're very polarized these days on everything, how do you make sure that belonging and equality is still front and center and top of mind, even if it's not trending?
Fantastic. And Kathryn, hi, thank you for patiently waiting.
No problem. Hi, Shelley. It's great to be here and so lovely to hear all of these introductions. I've been learning a great amount during the conversation so far. So my name is Kathryn Dovey. I'm Executive Director of an organization called Open for Business, which is a coalition of multinational companies that have come together to basically argue for the economic case for LGBT+ inclusion. And we've been around for about 5 years now. We were launched at the Clinton Global Initiative, and we have 34 member companies in the group. And we do a whole bunch of different research and data analysis to make that strong economic case for LGBT inclusion, looking at a whole different bunch of regions around the world. A lot of the challenges around building a diverse workforce, an inclusive workforce, have been covered already, and I wouldn't disagree with anything that has been said so far. I guess maybe at this stage, one thing I would add into the conversation is that I feel we don't always spend enough time on what's a fancy word, intersectionality, but basically we can tend to fall into the habit of looking at diversity issues as siloed issues, whether we're looking at gender or race or religion, sexual orientation, whether we're looking at disability, whatever it might be. But none of us are one thing, right? All of us are a rich tapestry of multiple things, and the workplace is then an amalgamation of all of those tapestries. And so I think that the more that we can look through that lens, the more of a nuanced and helpful conversation we can have. And then I'd say specifically in the LGBT+ space, here we're talking about building an inclusive workplace, but what about those people who are not in the workplace because they don't feel comfortable either applying, they don't feel it's for them, or they've been rejected from it. And then of those people who are in the workplace, what about the silent minority who are not bringing their whole self to work because they don't consider it to be safe or comfortable to do so? So I just want to add that into the conversation so far, and really looking forward to continuing the discussion with you all.
Fantastic. And I just have to say, 2 of you have companies using the word open, and I think that is just such an important word, open. Everyone is welcome. We are open for business. I just think that is so smart. Okay, so I am going to start filtering some questions in, even though selfishly I'm going to ask some of the ones that I want to ask, but I do want to start with this one that came in before we even started. They were so excited, so thank you. How do we start these important conversations about inclusion in a way which addresses and recognizes the discomfort of the conversation? And so in the green room, backstage or whatever it's called, in this interactive platform, we were talking about having an uncomfortable conversation, because having the uncomfortable conversations means we are talking about things that need to be talked about. Sometimes we're afraid to go there. But if we don't get comfortable being uncomfortable, we will not create the changes that we need to create. So how do we've talked about inclusion. That's a word that doesn't feel so scary. But when we get to creating that culture of belonging where everyone is heard, but a lot of people don't want to speak up. And now we're really living in a moment of racial justice and racial equity, where we need to create these spaces to have the uncomfortable conversations, to learn, to grow, to stretch, and to unite. Who has some input on how we do that? Joseph.
Yeah, I'd love to take that question because I think it's an instructive one. I had this conversation with Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield, the founders of Ben & Jerry's, probably at the height of the pandemic and all of the social unrest that was going on. And I asked them that very question. I said, is this our watershed moment to actually see some change happen? What do you think about that? And these guys are the poster children for activism. And I think it was Jerry Greenfield who said, it's our watershed moment if we make it so. And we have to ask the questions, and we just have to make folks uncomfortable. If they're that important, ask the question. Make the point, make the comment. Because this is, if you don't have a better time than now, I don't know what other chances we're going to get to kind of push the envelope a little bit and really make some systemic change here, because it is so critical. What COVID and the social unrest has really shown us, just the lack of trust throughout the system. So, trusting, if law enforcement is going to keep us safe, trusting if the system, whether it's capitalism or whatever, works for everybody. Trust is the biggest issue that is out there, and that's what's lacking in all of this. That's why we have the angst that's going on from all of these different issues that are going on. And that's why our model, it kind of solves that. And our open hiring was created for an environment like this. It's because of folks that were being excluded, whether it was housing, whether it was employment. And our founder, Bernie Glassman, he strongly believed, to the point where he was literally, and that's how open hiring got started, literally pulling people off the streets saying, hey, you want to work? You want to get some skills? You want a job? In the Zen Buddhist community that were, baking cakes in, Riverdale, Bronx. He just pulled people off the streets and started working with them, because he felt that if people aren't being fully used to their God-given potential, we all lose. It's not just about that person, it's about what have I lost because I didn't give you a job or I didn't allow you to do something. So if we really want to make change, you got to go the whole Bernie Glassman way. Just pull the people off the streets, make the comment, be bold.
But Joseph, you're talking about the pipeline of now filling it with diversity, but how do you make that group of differences unite and feel comfortable? So, how do you create that, as Nicole said, that culture of belonging inside of that organization? So you fill the pipeline. Is it a culture of belonging because everyone sees themselves there, and so there's a lot of everybody?
It's a culture of belonging because we that's our values. So our values are non-judgment. Our values are path making. We want you to understand, and we actually ask you that. One of the innovations we made in the last few years was actually having a social worker sit in our bakery and at the foundation. We work with an organization called Westchester Jewish Community Services, and that person's job is to help you with the issues that prevent you, someone said earlier, prevent you from bringing your full self to work. Maybe you're dealing with the fact that you're sleeping in your car, or you have childcare issues, or you have housing issues, but you don't want to tell anybody. It's imperative that we make that point during orientation. This person is here to help you. I cannot help you be successful, whether it's at home or in the job, unless you tell us. We want you to tell us. That's why you're here. You're a part of a family. It's a whole part of the support. The open hiring, the list, that's just the beginning. But the whole revolutionary concept and the evolution of human resources is really about looking at the whole employee and looking at it holistically. And how can I support that employee from the moment they get here until the moment they leave, voluntarily or involuntarily. But I will support you as long as you want to be successful and you want me to support you.
Does anyone else have a comment on that? Because I have a lot of questions coming in. Go, Archana.
Yeah, I'd like to extend that a little bit further. I think it also would help to come at it with grace and empathy, and go a little bit away from the cancel culture. There's a lot of, you make one wrong move and I call you out on it. We can't ever have a working professional relationship anymore, and you cease to exist as an entity in the company or in the community. We need to have a little bit more grace when we are educating, when we are calling out any microaggressions, anything that may be perceived offensive, even if that was not the intention, but do it in a way that helps everybody grow, because being uncomfortable helps growth. And if we go away from that, and I think it's hard that's what's causing a lot of the consternation in the system, or not being able to have these hard conversations.
Fantastic. Haifa.
I'd like really to speak on reforms as a magic wand that really played the major role in the way that we really live now in Saudi Arabia. I think all of you are aware that we're undergoing a lot of modernization, and the process for that was through reforms, especially for women in Saudi Arabia. I think in 2015, the percentage of the women in the workforce were really only 13%. And now, 2019, we grew to 35%. So reform played a major role for us that made everybody comfortable to have women in every corner and different kind of levels of the society, of the organization. I think we still need a lot of way to go, but at least in a short span of time, we made a big change, and the change that used to be resisted by a lot of people for a long time, reform made it really acceptable. So I think this was really an important message that I can really share with you, and that we're living now this kind of a success for women in Saudi Arabia. And one of the very important things that we're trying really to portray this or transfer this kind of success to the G20 countries, because women in business council or action council was really a theme that really across all the B20 task forces, in order really to encourage women in investment, in trading, in digitalization, in education, in all parts. So it will help a lot to enforce this through reforms and through kind of policies. So I agree with Stephenie. The policy making and reforms are really an important part of the change that really should happen, because you're putting the infrastructure. The infrastructure makes everybody really happy and make everybody accept the other, regardless, women or other kind of underprivileged people or youth or adults. So all of this, the inclusiveness will really cross every sector in this. So that's what I can say.
Thank you. So Stephenie, you were going to weigh in also the different regions, if there are any, on a global basis, but the policies that matter and, how we get past these uncomfortable conversations to creating the actions that we need to see?
Well, I think first we get past them by having the uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's just very imperative. I have really just one anecdote from even this morning. I was at a work meeting, and, obviously I am a white woman, and we were having a conversation, and one of my colleagues who is Black, an American woman, said, basically, it's not on me to do your work. Collectively. I mean, it wasn't directed just at me, but I think it's a fair point. Like, how do we ensure that we're listening to people, but we're also not asking and putting additional burdens on people of color, on Black employees, so that we're really willing to have a conversation where we understand how we can listen, but also how we can take action ourselves and try to change our workplace, try to change the way we interact with people. And again, develop policies and mechanisms that I think make everybody feel comfortable. I also think one of the things that helped in this conversation that we were having was that it was a lot about, it wasn't personal. I mean, it was obviously personal, but it was just about saying, this is the way to really ensure that everyone will feel comfortable, and not having it be an attack on someone, but saying, this is how you need to understand how I think about this as a person who's been marginalized over time, and what I need to ask you to do as someone who is in the same workplace, in the same kind of work environment.
Very fair. I want to throw another question into the mix, and it is, how do we discuss the role of immigrants and refugees in the labor market? Who can take that one on? Haifa?
Yes, I think I'm part of a group that we're trying really to build this kind of a success among different kind of immigrant to different parts of Europe, to give them education, to give them their bad luck really put them into this situation. So having those immigrants and accepting them in any part of the world, I think it becomes part of the responsibility of these governments. And having said this, it's not really that enforcement or, but they're becoming part of the underprivileged people that really we need to cater for. And we need to make sure that reforms really include them. Strategy of different kind of system, different kind of organization, either government or private or nonprofit, should really cater for those actions. For those people really need to be taken into consideration in any kind of planning for the government, because it's becoming more and more these kind of people as representing a group of any country. In different parts of the world, in Saudi Arabia, in the US, in Europe, and everywhere, refugees and immigrants becoming part of every single country.
Thank you. And Angela, I know you're going to jump in, and this is a perfect place for you, especially with upskilling and how we ensure that everyone has the tools and the education and the skills they need to enter the workplace, the workforce, and to be successful.
Yeah, and I think it's an important conversation to talk about immigrants and refugees. You know, when I shared that there's 73 million people who have the skills to do higher wage jobs, a lot of them are immigrants and refugees, right? And that's why it's really critical that we think about alternative pathways for certification and how we assess skills, right? So often, you know, when working in New York, I'd hear of a taxi driver who had been an accountant or had been a physician in their country, and when they come here to the States, they have to start from square one, or that their higher ed credentials aren't recognized by our universities here or employers. So I think it's really important for us to think about this workforce that has really put many barriers, right? Pre-COVID, we're not working for many people. How do we remove some of those barriers? So, you know, Joseph talked about like banning the box, for instance. When we talk about, you know, jobs that require a bachelor's degree, but really you don't need one. You know, really thinking about how do we take down the barriers to make work more accessible. And I have to get on that last conversation when we talk about these uncomfortable conversations. I always push when I hear that, because I say, well, whose comfort are we prioritizing? Because if you think of many people who are living at the margins, who are living with intersectionality, they're having these conversations every day. This is their lived reality, right? They're having it with their family, they're having it with their friends, they're having it with their peer groups at work. It's a matter of us making sure, making room at the table that we can have them at large in companies, right? That we're not just thinking about the people who are the higher level executives, making sure that they're comfortable, that we're actually bringing in people who are being impacted. One way I'll just share that we're doing that at New Profit is, we always say proximity is expertise. For our Future of Work initiative, we stood up a worker advisory board of frontline workers who had been impacted by COVID. They help us develop our strategy. They helped us select what type of trainings. They told us what a living wage meant to them. And that's really important that we start following that lead and really recognizing.
That's incredible, because I think that I'm playing with an idea called proximity ship. We talk about sponsorship, which has bias in, bias out, because people will pull up the people that look and act like them. And, mentorship, I talk about mentorship in the moment. There's no such thing as one perfect mentor. You get bits and bites of amazing wisdom from people who've been there, done that, across different experiences. But proximity ship, give someone 5 minutes. You will learn something new from that person, just by spending time with them. Okay, we have half an hour left, and I want to take this second half of our conversation to solutions and actions for change. And Kathryn, I am going to start with you and then go to Nicole, because both of you had inputs. This is your time to bring it home. But I would love to talk about, and I want you to wipe your mind clean. And if I said you are now the architect of the future of work, future of workplace, future of workforce, which includes everything, nothing holding you back. You could create whatever you could imagine. We could get rid of the junk in the trunk. So I don't want you to build from the past. I don't want you to think about what could be one day in the future. Now, you are the architect of the workforce and the workplace today. What would you put in place? And I want to go back to what Archana said about focus. Stay focused. Tell me the things you would build. Kathryn.
What a beautiful gift. That's suddenly a lot of power. I love it. Thanks very much, Shelley. I think, look, in the workplace of the future, we wouldn't be having uncomfortable conversations because we would have had all of them. And I really echo what Angela just said about this whole point about discomfort. One person's discomfort is another person's truth, right? And so it's really, really important that we're always recognizing whose perspective are we talking from, and whose kind of comfort or uncomfort are we thinking about. And I think in the workplace of the future, we would have a multi-layered lens. We would always have everyone in mind. It would be a beautiful rainbow with everyone covered. And I think that would be a fantastic place to work, and we'd probably never want to go home again. So I think that's very important, always remembering that perspective. I think the other thing that's important, and Shelley, you just mentioned bias. We haven't really touched on it much yet. But I think it's very, very important to recognize that every single one of us come with our own biases. And the first sort of step towards true inclusion and true diversity and true belonging is to look inside ourselves. What is the received learning that we've been exposed to our whole lives? What limitations has it placed upon us? And it will vary according to where we grew up, what we've experienced. It's so diverse and so multifaceted. But I think having that really honest conversation with self is so important in order to truly be inclusive and welcoming and just want to create a brilliant place for us all to work and be. So that's a little idealistic, but we can start with that.
We'll start with the idealism, and now we're going to continue through our conversation. Nicole, take it from there.
So Kathryn, I appreciate your idealism. I'm living in the same world, apparently, that you want to live in as well. You know, we think about unconscious bias, and we've not talked about it a lot, but I do think it is critically important to this conversation because we do all bring our stuff right to the table. We bring our stuff to work. And when I think about leaders in particular, their unwillingness to acknowledge, right, that they do have these unconscious biases and they do come into workplace decisions every single day. And so I would hope for a world where our leaders would be comfortable acknowledging their own biases. But I would also hope for a world of a workforce of transparency. I think that for a very long time, we have not been transparent with our employees and in transparency, you know, around really motivations and what it is that's driving the companies. Obviously, I work for a company that, you know, we've got to get to a bottom line. We've got investors, but I do think that there is absolutely the necessity for transparency. And the final thing, I guess, that I would say in this world that I wish that we could live in, that I think we actually may be moving towards, is eliminating location bias when we think about recruiting talent for our organizations. And I think that this world of COVID that we're living in has exposed the flaws in having location biases. I think that, you know, once you get rid of location biases, you open the world up to the pool, the talent pool from where you can actually recruit. And I actually think that that will help build more inclusive workforces when you sort of break down those walls and show transparency, leaders who are willing to acknowledge their own biases, and, you know, breaking down location biases would be, I think, in my world, the things that I would do.
So far, I'm going to come to Joseph now. So far, we've used very important words from open to flexibility to fluidity to transparency to authenticity to empathy, right? And, you know, this whole caring kind of culture. So we've been unlocking to proximity a whole bunch of very important words that all could, of course, conjure up the types of actions, the types of leaders that we want to create. One of the things I talk a lot about, I can't stand when we say unconscious bias. If you use the word unconscious, you're conscious. Like unconscious bias. Well, then you're conscious of the bias, and then you have a choice: do you do something or do you not do something? Joseph, keep building for us.
Yeah, so I was going to say what's implied by the question is that folks are in these environments, whether it's their supervisor, their manager, or their board, someone is making them uncomfortable to make these comments. So I think as leaders, we have to set the example. It's not just acknowledging our own biases, but also inviting the feedback, inviting the challenge. I have a book on my desk called Fierce Conversations. That's something we talk about a lot here. Is tell me what's going on. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what your challenges are as an employee. Well, what are we doing right? What are we, what are the opportunities for us to grow? I mean, we as leaders have got to set that example to say, you know what, I want to listen to you, but I throw it back to them as well. You have to talk to your other colleagues as well. If they're not doing something that's not up to standard, have a conversation with them. It doesn't have to be a rude conversation. It's all about how can we be better as an organization, and it's supporting the organization. To me, that's really the stakeholder capitalism, philosophy here. It's like we're all in this together. So how can we all elevate each other and elevate our own game to make this a better organization, to deliver a better product, to support our customers? So I think the leaders have to set the example of inviting the courageous conversations, the fierce conversations, and making people uncomfortable, because growth and comfortable they can't coexist, and you're going to have to be a little uncomfortable to grow. So
give me your architectural build on the workforce or workplace. What's a solution you want to put in place other than the open hiring, which is genius, by the way?
It is very genius. To me, it's the culture of, from the moment you come through the door, and I say this even when I interview folks, one, you got to buy into our mission. I mean, it's just, or I don't even care what your resume or what you've done in your life, you have to buy into the mission, but you have to be vocal. You have to tell me, what's going on in the organization. You have to tell me how we can do better. How can we innovate? How can we grow? It's really about that openness, and it's being authentic and transparent, as we've already said. It's really it's a character. It's the mores of the organization. That's what you have to encourage and have to foster, and that's a 24-hour thing. But everyone's got to do it, and it's not just it's everyone.
I always say hire for passion, train for skill, unless you want to be a doctor, lawyer, or an accountant. We might need a little textbook in there. Stephenie.
Yes, I mean, I think building on that, one thing when we talk about authenticity is ensuring that what we do internally is also consonant with what we do externally. And so I feel like for a lot of the clients we work with, we're very privileged. We live in places where we can be having conversations about inclusive workplaces. But a lot of times, especially if you think about supply chains of major corporations, just as an example, companies sometimes have great policies at the headquarters or for their staff in the field, but they don't have those same policies or even ask the questions about who's in their supply chain. What practices do those companies have? How do they treat their employees? Do they pay them fairly, fair labor practices, and all that kind of thing? So I think one thing is, I think it's a solution as well, is that employees and consumers are looking to see that there is authenticity and, again, consistency between what companies do on the inside and what they do on the outside. But I think it's always helpful to remind ourselves to ask the question about how people are treated by others who work for us, again, down through the supply chain or companies that we're affiliated with, because it does have an impact on our firms, but really being mindful of the fact that there are a lot of people who aren't even able to have this conversation, and how we can make sure that we are trying to, through our work, bring them into the process as well. Understanding it's super complicated, but I think asking the questions is a really good step people can take, and it can lead to change.
And I want to say it's asking the question, and I'd like to suggest it's also holding people accountable, because making people feel comfortable and belong and have uncomfortable conversations or fearless conversations, let's go to the positive, those are soft skills. And, we reward on ROI, bottom line performance, return on investment. How do we also create accountability around what I call ROE, return on equality, and making people feel comfortable? So I would love to just add that twist to the future of workforce, is that we hold ourselves accountable for culture and creating that culture. Archana.
I think we also need to figure out where we stand in the spectrum of equity versus equality. I think we're not going to make progress if we continue thinking everything needs to be equal and everybody needs to feel good, because that assumes there's no history there and there was no systemic bias. And the world of future needs to have more equity built in there to make sure we're bringing in the less fortunate, the underrepresented groups along, give them a stool to stand on, versus say everybody, it's an even playing field. And that makes people more uncomfortable. But I think, as we have all discussed, uncomfortable is good.
I have to show
so that would
this.
be mad there.
So crazy that you just said that. The stool. I use this as an example. It's so funny that you just said that, because I just brought it down here. And I just want you to reinforce what you just said, because equality and equity are both about equal opportunity, but they're different starting points. Archana, just explain what you said, because it was very important as a differentiator.
And equality assumes everybody starting from the. Can you hear me?
Yep, now we can.
Okay. Equality assumes everybody starting from the same point and reaching for the same tree, fruit hanging from the tree, if you will. But equity acknowledges that there are some groups that are actually starting, the tree is tipped in one direction and they all can't have equal reach to the fruit. So they need a little bit more support So there's a stool or a ladder to help them get to that same fruit, and there's support there because we want ultimately everybody to win.
Fantastic. Haifa, take us through. You're the architect of future of workplace, future of workforce.
Oh, this is a great work and design. I think there are three things that I always really wish to have in any future workforce. I think I'm building on the other panelists and what they said. I think the equitable future work award is really an important part in any kind of organization. The universal social protection, the truly universal access, for example, to digital tool for education and for work, is really an important part of the equitable kind of factor that I'm really looking at. And this second part, the second factor that I want to see in the workforce in the future is the relevancy of their skills. And because what we're doing now maybe is not going to be, or what we're teaching now is not going to be good for the future, because it's different kind of talents needed. So now it's unnamed and unheard of, which is really like the fourth industrial revolution or the green economy. All of this were not part of the past, and now it's really becoming part of the skills that's needed in the society or the workforce these days. And of course, well, I'm building on what everybody said is the inclusive kind or inclusivity of the workforce for women and for other people. That's really important to share or to be not discriminated against. And one more thing that I can see from my own perspective is the internationalization aspect. And I think most of the organization they work with the people inside their country. But the international perspective, the intercultural, the interconnectivity and the network should really exceed that, because this will broaden the perspective and it will not really resist any kind of change in the future. And it will help even anybody to adapt immediately to any kind of changes. Once you get to learn about other culture, about other situation, then you will get out of your comfort zone and really get into another kind of life that will help you a lot to understand the others, to understand the other also work that's needed to be done. So these are the factors that I see from my own point of view, and I want to design the workforce of the future.
Well, you and Angela need to be partners in the architectural firm, because she's now going to bring it home on skill set. So you just set that up brilliantly, Angela.
Let's see. When I think about that, like ideal state, really we're in this moment of learning is just the continuous activity that we'll all do. So I would love to see more employers think about how they upskill and retool their workers at all levels, and not just leaving that for the higher level executives, right? If you look at most employers, they spend 80% of their professional development dollars on their high skilled executives. So just thinking of retooling and upskilling is part of everyone's job and everyone's responsibility, that we're not just relying on K-12, we're not just relying on post-secondary, that we're acknowledging that there's going to be other pathways and routes to employment, and that those are valid and those should be acceptable, and that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. So when I'm thinking about that work in the future, there's an opportunity for people to always upskill, to reskill, and have those credentials recognized and be able to obtain a job with a living wage.
Well, and now we have just a few minutes left, so I want to speed date through this, do a speed round, and I'm going to ask you a question. I want to go from idealism to reality, and I always say leadership is not about age, it is not about title, it is not about position, it is about action. I would like to hear from you, and we all have the power and we all have the responsibility to do something. What is, as Archana brought up before, focus? What is one thing you are going to ensure you do next to make the workplace, your workplace, the world you live in, more inclusive, more diverse, and create that culture of belonging that we talked about? And I'm going to start, Stephenie, in the middle this time with you.
Great. And that's a great question. I mean, I think for me, it's continuing to understand that we need to look at across our organization and the organizations we work with, where the internal and the external don't meet up. So that we're trying to understand how we can kind of lift everybody's, lift all boats. That the rising tide lifts all boats, whether it's people in the headquarters or in a country office or in the supply chain. So really committing to ensuring that there's looking across the board at what the internal and external policies are for our clients. I think personally, I would just say, I mean, I think it's very hard, but I do think, really listening to people and trying to understand what their perspectives are at the workplace or in the other things that I do every day, to really be, I think, as much as I can, someone who can be helpful in bringing about a world where we all feel we get to participate and we get to bring our true selves to our workplace, to our community, to everything that we do.
Fantastic. Nicole.
I would say the thing that I'm going to continue to do is to just be open and honest and willing to have those hard conversations. I have colleagues who reach out frequently who say, I don't know what to say to you. I just know I'm supposed to reach out to let you know, right? And to acknowledge that the moment that we are in. And sometimes that's hard. And sometimes it's heavy to carry that burden. But I think that I have an obligation to continue to engage and to put myself out there and encourage other Black employees in particular to put themselves out there. And I think operating from a point of positive intent, assuming positive intent, will continue to sort of carry us. And I guess the final thing I just would say is, and we talked a little bit about accountability, but I think none of this works without accountability, and accountability from the top to the bottom. And so that's part of the work that I'm doing and will continue to do, is to build into our strategies, where we are holding everybody accountable, from the CEO, all the way down. But I think just continuing to engage and to be honest and truthful, even when it doesn't feel so good to do so.
No paycheck if you're not an inclusive leader, to the bone. You need to have that in your DNA. I mean, there's got to be a consequence for bad behavior and a reward for making your team, which is our greatest asset, feel comfortable. Archana.
I think in a lot of businesses, when we talk about diversity and inclusion in general, everybody pivots to hiring and getting more people in the door, which is important, and I'm not discounting it. But the belonging and making sure everybody feels like they are included and feel that way, and we retain those people, is often playing second fiddle. So for me, that's the higher priority, is making sure that we're having the hard conversations, we're enabling people, where the onus on that education of what that Black experience, for instance, looks like, is not on all of our Black employees. And it needs to not be the burden they carry in addition to all the injustices in the world. So how can we make sure there is an additional enablement or education program to help everybody else get up to speed without the Black employees feeling that burden? So I think that's been my focus.
Haifa.
I think I'm speaking also from my role now as a B20 member in the community, and how it is important now to lobby and making a lot of pressure on the leaders to really gain or to accept our strategy and recommendation, which is really, most of it is really about how to include women and underprivileged people, and upskilling the education, the people in different areas to close the gap. So this is very important for us, really, from B20 and for me as a member in that community at this moment. And we're about really to get to the leader of different 20 countries. I want to push for that and to make sure that really we succeed in our recommendation.
Fantastic. Kathryn.
So I will continue, of course, to push for LGBT plus equality in a myriad of different ways, working with the private sector to push for change in countries where it needs to happen. But I think maybe more concretely, something I was thinking about earlier when I was listening to people's points is that we talk a lot about empathy. It's come up a few times here, but I've heard some really interesting examples of kind of action-oriented empathy, which does do away with this idea that one particular group carries a burden. That shouldn't be the case at all. I think gathering people's stories of lived realities and getting them out there in whatever way we need to, whether it's through collective websites or having other people even take the words and speak them so that we know exactly what's going on, but it's not in those individuals who are having to carry that burden, but just, yeah, different ways to actually make empathy a thing as opposed to just playing lip service to it.
Joseph.
Yeah, I would just expand on your point of accountability, Shelley. We've been talking about it, but I think I want to be more explicit and say, let's measure what all of this means. Let's put some numbers behind it. When we talk into Archana's point, hiring, it's about retaining as well, but it's also the folks that we retain. Do they even feel included? Do they even feel that they can advance within your organization? So we really need to put some measurements and timelines around all of the stuff that we're talking about, particularly when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and hold companies accountable, hold leaders accountable that way, because obviously what gets measured gets managed. So we really have to focus on that.
Your former CEO, the former CEO of Unilever, taught me something that I'll never forget, and that is you can't treasure what you don't measure.
Exactly.
And that is so important. The other thing that he did, holding people accountable, they have, Unilever had an elective paternity leave policy, but we know that only 34% of men take full paternity leave. He actually called the men that did not take it, asking them why. And he said, I want you to take it because I want to have, the soft skill leaders, people with empathy and compassion and nurturing and, all those caregiving qualities. So you can hold people accountable, and it does start at the leadership level. Angela.
Yeah, I work for an impact investing fund. I oversee this $15 million fund, and we're investing in innovators who are innovating around the future of work. One thing that we continue to do is that when we invest in someone, we make sure we ask them that question: what does your leadership look like? Who's leading your team? And if they are not diverse from the top down, we're not making that investment. And so we know that dollars is our, investment is a great lever and incentive for people to do the right thing. And so that's what we're going to continue to do. We're going to continue to ask leadership teams and entrepreneurs that we're investing in to show us their diversity numbers. We also want to know that they're actually centering worker voice, that they have proximity to the workers that they aim and claim to serve. And then the other piece of it is we're going to make sure that they are paying it forward, really investing in the communities that they're working in. And so those are the three things that we're doing. When we're investing this $6 million, we've also made a public commitment that we're going to invest in 40% of organizations who are led by people of color. And so that way we're holding ourselves accountable.
So I have a great connection for you, Angela. Let's discuss an organization that is a non-for-profit that has 2 million entrepreneurs for job creation in 87 countries. So your new profit could go a long way. So I just want to thank each and every one of you. I learned so much. This was so informative for me. What is clear is you are all conscious leaders. You all walk the talk. You are paying it forward with generosity, and you are going to activate the solutions for change that are so necessary. We are going to create that measurement for accountability so that we ensure we don't just admire the problems, but we actually make the progress, create the impact that we all need to see in the world today so that we have a much more inclusive workplace. So thank you so much for bringing such tremendous insight to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.